Hello everyone, welcome. I wanted to do a video today on how the earth fell from a fifth dimensional field down to a third dimensional field. And I wanted to share this. So this happened millions of years ago, and many of us call this the fall from grace. I'm not going to go into detail in terms of Lemurians and Atlanteans and the races that did this. I'm going to do a very broad overview. The details are going to be in the book that I wrote that's coming out. But I need to do a broad overview in order to keep it short and concise. But it's really important that we remember what happened. And the reason this is so important is because we are doing the reverse right now. We are shifting from a third dimension back into a fifth dimension. The human collective, humanity, the form, and the earth plane. Okay, so what occurred millions of years ago is the reverse. It went from 5D down to 3D. And when you start understanding how that happened, you start to remember, oh my God, this is what we're doing right now. This is exactly how it works. So when Earth was first designed and created, she was a being just like you're a being, just like I'm a being, a consciousness, right? An energetic consciousness. And she chose to move herself down into a 5D form. She asked the Galactic Federation of Light, which is a group of higher dimensional light beings, to be her guardians, so to speak, to watch over this journey, this process, this experiment. She chose, as a higher dimensional consciousness, to move into a 5D form, and she wanted to experiment in moving from that 5D form into a 7D form, or 6D form, and then into 7D energy, because when you move past the 6D, you're no longer form. She wanted to shift consciousness inside form, which is very rare and normally doesn't happen. Normally consciousness chooses what it wants to be in, intends it, shifts their energy and vibration and frequency, and moves into that dimensional field. I.e., a Palladian that's in a 9th dimensional field will say, I now want to be 12th dimensional, and it will instantaneously, through intent and energy, shift its frequency into the 12th dimension and just to deliberately move right into that dimensional field. That's how we play in the quantum. We are not stuck in any consciousness. We are not, I am this consciousness. I am a Palladian. I'm only a Palladian, right? You can be anything at any time and any now when you understand energy and intent. You choose intention and you create through the energy of it, the frequency, right? So she created herself in a 5D form, which is what we call Earth, Gaia, any other word that you have for her, right? And she played in that form with 5D humans and 5D beings for millions of years. And then what began to happen, because this is all in a quantum space, which means that any dimensional field can be accessed at any time. The way you access a dimensional field is you have to vibrate. If you're in form, you have to vibrate in or close to that dimensional field. For instance, if I am a third dimensional human, and I'm in a quantum space, there's a 7th dimensional field here. I will not be able to see it or access it unless I can increase the frequency within this form and tap into that 7th dimensional field, right? Many of us right now are in third dimensional forms or fourth dimensional forms, which means that we are holding that frequency, third dimensional frequency or fourth dimensional frequency, and we are tapping into a 5D frequency. Why are we tapping into that frequency? Because we are holding that 5D frequency in our bodies. And so when we vibrate out with our resonance, we can tap into that consciousness, that field. So when humans were 5D, right, they were vibrating in a 5D consciousness. Their body vibrated out 5D, but they were in a quantum space, so they could tap into many other dimensional fields if they chose and if they vibrated there. What started happening was human forms and the beings inside of it slowly started tapping into 4D consciousness. Now, I want you to recognize and remember that dimensional fields hold a spectrum of frequency, which holds a spectrum of consciousness. For instance, a 3.0 to a 3.10 hold on a second, my nose, 4.0 to 4.10, 5.0 to 5.10, right? That's just a way for us to linearly understand dimensional fields. It's a spectrum. It's not like I jump into the 5D and I'm in a 5D field and it's only this one frequency. There's a spectrum to each dimensional field depending upon its frequency bandwidth, right? So when you go lower in dimensions, the spectrum increases in size. So there's more to experience, okay? When you go higher up in frequency, that spectrum moves closer together. There's less consciousness to experience. So these 5D humans started to tap into a very high 4D frequency. So they started tapping into consciousnesses that were in a 4D spectrum, but were around the 4.7 to 4.9 kind of field, right? And this could be anything that could be something close to like individuality, right? Thinking about only myself all of a sudden. Like, well, what if I just wanted to do this? What if I just wanted this for me? What if I got this, crystal or whatever, and I was just going to hold it for me, right? That's a 4D consciousness, thinking in terms of individuality. Nothing wrong with this. It's just a consciousness, right? There's a consciousness that can be experienced in the 4D in those higher fields that can create consumption, right? Like wanting more. I want more. I want more. I want more, right? Starting to fall out of more of a present moment flow state and more into a creating based on more of a desire state as opposed to intention and flow. So over hundreds of thousands of years, as light beings were coming down into 5D form, they were starting to, not all of the beings, okay, but many of the human beings were starting to play and access these 4D consciousnesses. And they started playing in them when they weren't yet anchored in the 4D yet. They were still anchored in 5D, but they were tapping in. Very similar to how we are anchored in 3D, but we're tapping into 4D consciousness and tapping into 5D consciousness, meaning we're experiencing it, we're feeling it, we're playing in it. The way you know you're anchored in it is that you are being that dimensional field in every now. You're no longer being in a third dimensional field, right? That's how you know that you have anchored that next dimension, that you are actually being only the dimension that you are anchored in, even though you can tap into the lower and the higher. So these 5D human forms were tapping in and tapping in and tapping in. Now, as they tapped in to this consciousness externally, because all consciousness that is played with is in the external, okay? It is consumed into the human form. So the way that we experience energy as energetic beings in form is that we tap into that energetic consciousness and then it gets filtered into the physical form, just like it does right now with us. And so these 5D humans were ingesting literally 4D consciousness. That's what they were choosing to play in. As that 4D consciousness moved into the human form, what do you think that did to the human form that was in a 5D? That consciousness as energy is lower in vibration than what the body was holding as 5D. And so slowly over time, these beings consuming this 4D consciousness started pulling their body down very slowly into a 4D spectrum, into a 4D field. And this took hundreds of thousands of human linear years. Okay, this took a very long time, much longer than what it's taking us to go up. So the next thing you know, after hundreds of thousands of years of humans choosing to play, the more the humans were opening up and playing in this fourth dimensional field, the more their bodies were holding that fourth dimensional consciousness, the more that dimensional field started to open. Meaning that dimensional field was always there. So is the fourth, so is the third, so is the sixth, seventh, eighth, right? But as more human forms hold it in their bodies and start to play in it, it opens that field up for easier access. Now, all of a sudden, humans that really never wanted to even think about a 4D consciousness were now seeing it more. They were watching humans be in it, right? It was becoming bigger. The bubble, the 4D bubble was getting larger. Makes sense? Imagine a dimensional field as a bubble, just so that you can have a better understanding of like visualizing it. So this 4D field started getting bigger and bigger as more humans were standing in that dimensional field. Very similar to what's happening right now. As more of us start to be in the fourth dimensional field and the fifth dimensional field, our bodies are holding that higher frequency. And the more of us that are holding that higher frequency, the more that dimensional field is going to open up and be easier to access, not just for ourselves, but all the other humans that are starting to awaken. As a way shower, we go first. We start tapping into these dimensional fields. We start digesting that consciousness into our bodies. We start holding these higher frequencies. The way that we're even able to access them is because all of the light is coming into our bodies from the sun. So we are starting to increase our vibration, which allows us to start to tap into those other dimensional fields. And then we choose to play in it. And then we consume it, right? And then we're holding these frequencies more and more. And the more of us that are doing this, the more that dimensional field starts to open up. And all of a sudden, there are humans that had no idea of this other consciousness is starting to feel the other consciousnesses in these higher realms. Their hearts are starting to open and they don't know why. They're starting to feel more of a present moment state. They're starting to shift out of certain experiences and beliefs and all these things, right? The reason is because we, as the way showers, are going first, holding the higher frequencies in the body, playing in the dimensional fields, and eventually anchoring into the fourth dimension, standing in it, and it becomes a very large bubble. Right? Now, all of a sudden, there's a fourth dimensional field on the earth plane. At the same time, there's a third dimension. And now the human gets to choose. That is what happened millions of years ago. Humans started anchoring down into a 4D field. Remember, when you anchor a dimension, you are literally holding that dimensional field in your body at all times. So your reality becomes that cloud. It becomes that dimension. Now, these 4D beings could still tap into the 5D, but they were choosing to experience the earth reality in a 4D field. And this took a very, very, very long time. Right? And so now, when light beings were coming down onto the earth plane, there were two dimensional fields and two different dimensional human forms that they could choose to drop into. After hundreds and thousands of years of the human tapping into this field, they were able to open that field up and make it available for the human to stand in and play in. They shifted their vibration and their frequency down. And that happened again in the third dimension. It took millions of years for the 5D human to open up the third dimensional field and to anchor it. It took maybe, if I were to give you numbers, right? Like the numbers are so ridiculous because they don't exist in higher dimensional realms. But if I were to just throw out numbers, let's just say it took 800,000 years to go from a 5D form to a 4D, and it took another million years to go from a 4D to a 3D, right? Maybe not that long, but it was a very long time. And so then you had humans that were holding a 5D form, the Lemurians and Atlanteans. You had humans that were holding 4D forms and many races that were created as 4D beings. And then you had humans beginning to stand and be 3D. All at the same time on the same earth plane. All based on choice and the quantum field. You understand? If you're in a quantum space, which all consciousness is, it has choice in every now and what it wants to be and play in. It gets to choose. And if it's vibrating in a frequency that can tap into that consciousness, it can choose to be in it. However, based on where the body is anchored, That's going to be its baseline foundational reality until it starts to consume more of that consciousness. So over time, as more humans played in the 4D, tapped into the 4D, they started feeling control. Oh my God, I love control. Control feels so good. Then they started playing in this is mine, this is yours. Then they started playing in I'm safe only if I have this sort of stuff around me. Then they started playing in, experience such as what would be another one that they played in? Jealousy comes in, right? Like, I want that, they have that, how do I get that, right? The ego structure started taking more of an active role when it starts to move into the lower consciousnesses. It starts to take a more active role because in the 4D, there is much more consciousness to experience than in the 5D. When frequency and energy slows down, it moves into lower dimensional fields. It literally stretches just like time, right? Time is just another way of experiencing energy. And the reason that we experience time so slowly is because we are slow energetically. When you start to increase your frequency and vibration, there is no time because you're no longer in a slow frequency and vibration. So when energy and frequency slows down, you start to experience time. And the energy and consciousness stretches. It slows and stretches, providing more to be experienced in that dimensional field. So there's even more to experience in a third dimensional field. That's why there's duality in the 3D, and there is duality still in the 4D. However, as you start shifting into the higher frequencies within the 4D spectrum, duality dissolves. So here you had an earth plane that intention was to hold a 5D field moving into a 7D field. You have humans on the earth plane that have free will, light beings that have free will, and they're in a quantum space. Hundreds of thousands of years later, after playing in this 5D field, they start recognizing, wait a second, there's these other consciousnesses that I'm feeling, that I'm tapping into. Just like as we started awakening however many years ago, right? We started recognizing, based on the light that was coming into our form, increasing this frequency inside us. Oh, wait a second, right? I can tap into something. There's something else here. The difference between that time and this time is that at that time, that is when Earth and the Galactic Federation of Light realized that human forms can actually pull the frequency of Earth and humanity down. There were no light workers at that time. There was no need for a light worker. Night workers didn't exist. There was no such thing as a light worker millions of years ago. They didn't understand that there could even be a light worker until they started recognizing, holy shit, a human form can literally pull energy and frequency from the earth, of the earth plane, the earth's energy, the earth's frequency, vibration down just by how they are holding the light in their body. I.e., if they start holding lower frequencies and the amount of those human forms get larger and larger, they start to pull the earth's frequency down. Even as there are 5D human forms standing there. There were way more 4D human forms starting to incarnate than there were 5D because there's more to play in, right? Doesn't make sense to us. We'd be like, well, that's ridiculous. I would absolutely be wanting to choose the 5D, right? But they had more to play in the 4D. So when the clearing happened, right, we call this the fall from grace. The Galactic Federation came in and literally cleared the entire Earth plane based on the Earth's decision. That's what she decided. Because what ended up happening was these races and these beings were getting in such a low frequency and consciousness that they were beginning to create massively destructive technologies that were going to destroy the actual physical earth plane. And there is a universal law that was designed when Earth was creating herself in this experiment that said, if ever the earth is going to be physically destroyed by any being on it, the Galactic Federation of Light will come in and intervene. So 15, 16, 20,000 years ago, somewhere around that time frame, the earth needed the Galactic Federation of Light to come in and intervene. This happened again around 5,000 years ago. 100 years ago. Between 5,000 and 100, meaning 5,000 years ago, the chaos started again. About 100 years ago, the Galactic Federation of Light came in to intervene. Anyway, 15, 20,000 years ago, they came in and cleared the earth plane. That's when you hear about all the Lemurians and the Atlanteans that were holding a 5D form, watching all of this unravel. And literally the entire planet had to be cleared. These beings had to be wiped off in order for the earth to start clean, clear, clean slate, right? So this is when the Galactic Federation of Light realized, oh, we can use light workers. We can use human forms who hold the intention of holding light and assisting the earth and moving back into the 5D. Because here she is now in a 3D form after millions of years. She got pulled down. And now we have to pull her back up into a 5D. She's going to need assistance. She's going to need help. The sun has already been designed millions of years ago. The sun was designed when the earth was designed. The sun is a very, very close being with the earth. They're like, divine counterparts, so to speak, right? Just like two peas in a pod. And so the sun's role has always been to bring light, high frequency light into the earth's body so that she can shift into the 7th dimensional field. That stayed the same when she was going from a 3D to 5D. So nothing changed in terms of how the light was going to come onto the earth form and onto the human form, right? There was always going to be the sun bringing the high frequency light in, shifting frequency up. But now the difference is that the earth was going to need assistance. It's very, very challenging to pull frequency higher when you are in a very dense field. She didn't choose to move into a 3D field when she originally created her design and experiment because it is extremely dense. It is like pulling your legs out of quicksand. It's very, very hard, as opposed to, imagine your legs being in a lake and your legs being in quicksand. The lake is 5D, quicksand is 3D. It's much more challenging. It takes a lot more energy to move out of the quicksand. So she was going to need a lot of work. So this is when they sent the first call for light workers, okay? And this is when the light beings chose now, many light beings chose to come in, not just to volunteer and be a part of the experience, but there were beings that now chose to come in to assist the earth in pulling her up in frequency into this 5D field. Okay, so they came in at a very low vibration. The form was very low. The earth plane was very low in frequency in the 3rd dimension. It was in a very low 3D field. And off they went, right? So they started holding light, holding light, holding light. That was the intention. Now, there were millions of others, hundreds of thousands of other human forms that did not hold that intention. There still are on the earth plane. There always have been. They're called volunteers. They're just coming down in to play in this field. And there is nothing wrong with that, right? They will, in this now, have an option to tap into a 4th dimensional field because all of you have opened that 4th dimensional field courageously by stepping into it, by moving through the ascension process, by courageously continuing to shift the frequency in your body and doing these things that, and these being in these ways that nobody else around you is being in, right? Clearing the density, feeling the emotions, the traumas, the pains, the sadness, the anger, the rage, all of that clearing out of your body courageously so that you can hold the higher frequency so that you can anchor the 4th dimensional field. You always have to go dimension by dimension. This is why I always speak. You don't just jump and anchor the 5D. That's not how energy works in a physicality. It has to go step by step, right? The physical form back in those days, millions of years ago, didn't go from a 5D down to a 3D. It slowly had to move. We slowly have to move up, right? The body is what is moving us. It's anchoring the light. We are choosing to participate in it. They both have to happen at the same time. So all of you have chosen to be doing this right now, regardless of what your reality looks like. If you're a bank teller or a bus driver or a teacher or any of it, it doesn't matter. You are still a way shower. You're still doing your work by being the way shower, light worker, starseed in physicality. Do you understand? You're doing it now. Every day that you decide to clear an emotion that you don't like by loving yourself and letting it move through you, you're doing the work. Every day that you decide to speak your truth and hold your boundaries and let your resonance tell you where you are and what you need, you're doing the work for Earth and humanity. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look like you're doing it. And many of you have been doing it for thousands of years, coming back in, coming back in, coming back in. There have been 1, 2, 3, I'm trying to think, 3 specific calls throughout the last 15, 20,000 years for light workers. The last most recent call was the clarion call in 1989. The harmonic conversions in 1989. And that's when a lot of starseeds came in. The clarion call is when you had all of the 3 waves of volunteers that Dolores Cannon talks about. Now, I want to preface really fast, I wasn't going to get into this, but I want to just say that you could be a light worker that dropped in at the very first call. And let's just say you did 10 lifetimes, right, over about a 5,000 year period, and you were done. You're like, I'm done. I'm going to go back into my higher consciousness within this 12D grid, and I'm going to hang out there for a while, right? This entire Earth experience is held within a 12th dimensional grid. So you go back up and you hang out for the next 10,000 years. You're not doing the work anymore. You're done. And then all of a sudden, the Galactic Federation of Light sends out another call, the clarion call, around the 20s. And you say, I'm going back in. And so you become one of the waves of volunteers, right? So just because you've been a light worker in another time doesn't mean you're not one of the 3 waves of volunteers. Or, we have this, like, the humans are so cute and funny. They really get stuck on ideas and labels and terms. And it's like, oh, well, who am I? Well, I thought I was one of these. I thought I was one of these, right? It's really cute. It's fine. It's perfect. But just know that many of you may have started a long time ago and taken a time out and then dropped back in when there was another call, right? All of this to say that this is how consciousness and energy works. That what you are doing right now in human form is pulling Earth and humanity into and through the next dimensional field. This is how we shift and ascend. This is what we're doing. We've already seen it happen in the past. All of you, if you start to remember, can remember this happening with Earth. You were either on the Earth plane millions of years ago watching this happen, or you watched it from a higher dimensional consciousness somewhere else, right? So you're familiar with how this works. And now we're like, oh shit. We got to bring this all the way back up. And Earth needs as much assistance as possible to first and foremost hold the high frequency light. The body, since we learned this millions of years ago, the body has the power and the ability to pull Earth and the entire collective into higher dimensional fields. The human form has the ability to open dimensional fields. Do you understand the power of that? We have the ability to open up another dimensional field for the entire collective to start to tap into. All by allowing ourselves to hold more frequencies of light, allowing the density to move through us, honoring our resonance, opening up our heart centers, aligning with our channel, connecting and embodying with the higher self, remembering the galactic beings, star beings, guides, whoever it is that's around you, remembering this entire experiment, remembering how it works, and courageously continuing to take one step in front of the other, regardless of how exhausted or sick or whatever you may be feeling. That's what's happening from a much bigger perspective. We get really focused on the nitty gritty, like right nows, which is totally okay. It's very human. But you are literally, no matter what you do for a living, no matter what you're doing right now, you are literally opening up the next highest dimensional field, the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension, for the entire humanity to choose to move into. You are shifting the entire collective into higher states of consciousness. You are shifting the entire earth plane into these higher frequencies, into these higher dimensions, just by being in form. So I did that pretty quickly, 30 minutes. That's impressive. I summed it up fast. So I'm going to just imagine the questions. So the questions that may be coming up right now are going to be, the earth didn't choose to move into a 3D. The earth allowed humans to have free will. So that's how it shifted down, right? And why didn't the earth just choose to move back into the 5D form and start at the 5D form? Because she was honoring this entire process. She was honoring how the experiment was playing out. She was honoring the fact that she was finding herself now in this form and in this way. It would just be like you and I, right? If we're going about our day and we're recognizing these things happening to us, we would surrender into whatever it was that was happening and just take it from there, move from there. Every present moment now you go forward in, right? You're always moving forward in the present moment stage, surrendering to whatever is showing up, knowing that it's always for your highest good, right? So here Earth is, and she recognizes, okay, here we are now. This is the present moment now state, and we can do this. We can move ourselves back up into, and we can do it with human forms. And we can do it with fifth dimensional beings such as trees and dolphins and whales and gorillas and these beings that can hold 5D consciousness, right? There's many forms on the earth plane that can hold 5D consciousness. So in this now moment, the 5D field, the 5D dimensional field is open and available for us, right? All around us. Our bodies are holding that consciousness, but we haven't anchored it yet. Again, if you are anchored, meaning that your entire body is vibrating in a 5D field, you're going to be much lighter. You're going to be much more light. You're going to be crystalline, right? Crystalline. You're going to be light. You're going to almost be able to see through your body. It's going to be very, very light. So most of us are not there yet. Many of us are now anchored in a 4D field, but we are still tapping into 3D. We're still Gumbying our way out of the very dense programs. Remember, it's like quicksand. So even though the body is now anchored into that 4D field and your reality is now going to be existing in that spectrum, you still are pulling yourself out of this dense consciousness. It's like old memories that you're having, right? Old ways of being, old things you used to say. It's like you're watching yourself in the past almost, right? Because you're no longer resonating because you're anchored in a 4D. And then we have to go through the entire 4D spectrum, just like they did back then. They had to go down. We have to now move through the entire 4D spectrum, which means that we have to continue to anchor and anchor and anchor. Anchoring is very, very different than tapping into and being in these higher states of consciousness, being in these higher dimensional fields. It's very, very different, right? It takes a long time for the body to anchor. And the body is exhausted throughout this entire process. That's why we are so exhausted, right? Many of us are really, really exhausted. If we have the ability to allow ourselves to just chill in that exhaustion, most of us don't, right? But if you do, you'll recognize, Jesus, I am exhausted. So can you see this entire picture as like, wow, this has been going on for millions of years. This is just another part of the journey, right? There's a fourth dimensional field that we are in. There's a fifth dimensional field that we are in. I am always moving through these different dimensional fields. I'm most likely anchored in a fourth dimensional field, but I'm being gumbied between the third dimension and the fourth dimension. I'm in quicksand still. I'm pulling myself. And this is the challenge of speaking our truth, honoring our resonance, trying to be more in present moment, trusting even though I can't see what's coming. All of these things that you are right now going through is you being pulled like a gumby because your body's already anchored in a 4D. Your body's ready for you, the human aspect, ego personality, to pull your feet out of that quicksand and stand. And you will. We all are. It's an everyday, every now conscious action, regardless of what it looks like in your reality, right? If you're sick, if you're lying on a couch all day, if you're unemployed, if you're living in your car, if you're going through a divorce, if you're having money issues, right? These all complicate our ability to stay present. It complicates our ability to stay open in our heart center. It complicates things, meaning that it distracts us. And when we're distracted, it can be a little bit more difficult to stay present and to remember all of this and to flow with it. You're still gumbying. You're still being the Gumby. I have no idea where that analogy came from, but it really freaking works. If you don't know the Gumby, Google it. It's that green figure that's funky, and you can like pull its legs and its arms, and it stretches really, really far. But it's the perfect analogy for us right now. Anyway, that's what's happening. When you are distracted by all these other human things, it's hard to stay present with the Gumby and with the choice of always remembering and choosing to courageously keep honoring your resonance, honoring your truth, honoring what's coming through, letting it come through, letting yourself feel it, whatever it is, right? Letting yourself be exhausted, loving yourself, having compassion for yourself. When you're not vibing with people anymore, when you want to run away because they're making your skin crawl, like all of these things that are happening, right? I'm sorry, but there's a hawk once again flying outside my canyon. I wish I could show it to you guys, like turn the camera, but you would never be able to see it. Anyways, point being is, this is everything you are going through is you being the Lightworker, Starseed, Way Shower going forward. By the way, people always ask what's the difference. There really isn't much difference other than we're all Way Showers no matter what name you call yourself. A Lightworker has been doing this for a little bit longer. The Starseed is a little bit newer to this whole kind of game. That's really the only difference, and it's really not even a difference. I wouldn't even put any difference on it. There isn't any. It just all is the same. Okay, you're all in the human form to pull the collective into these higher frequencies, into these higher realms. And it really doesn't matter if you know what your gifts are, if you're doing your purpose work. By being in the human form, can you surrender to the fact that all you need to do, regardless of what your human ego is telling you or wants you to do, all you need to do is start to be and play in the higher realms. Walk the example, be the example, start moving forward. Because if you remember what happened millions of years ago, that's what they did. These 5D humans started being the example of 4D. They started being in 4D, playing in 4D, and they pulled humanity into that frequency, right? And that's what we're doing now. There's always choice, though. This is really important to recognize. There is always choice, meaning that back then, when there was a 4D field and eventually a 3D field, there were still humans that were in 5D. The Lemurians and the Atlanteans were some of them, right? The Lemurians and the Atlanteans never held 4D and 5D unless they chose to, and then they were no longer Lemurian and Atlanteans. Lemurians and Atlanteans were 5D humans, humans holding 5D frequencies and fields. If a Lemurian decided to start playing in a 4D field, it would take a very long time, maybe one lifetime, maybe 2 lifetimes, to eventually find themselves in a 4D field. Once they're in a 4D human field, they're no longer being that Lemurian consciousness. or that Atlantean consciousness, right? Which is a 5D consciousness. And they're now playing in a 4D consciousness. Again, labels are really, really challenging, and they're really difficult to explain things in, because it just doesn't make sense when you start using these labels. But what's important to understand is that there's a 5D Lemurian and there's a 4D human at the same time, or a 4D race, a 4D form, right? On the same earth plane. That Lemurian is choosing to stay in that 5D consciousness and not play. There are many humans right now that are anchored in 4D, playing in 4D, being in 4D, and many starting to anchor in 5D, right? And there's many humans that are in 3D and are going to stay in 3D the entire time this happens. That's their choice. That's their absolute choice. There will be a time in another now, many years from now, who knows how many, that the largest collective will be in a 5D, right? But there will always be the availability of a 3D. The earth herself is holding a 5D field. She's also holding a 4D field. She's also holding a 3D field, right? So you can imagine it as a past, current, right? Or future for us, right? Past, future. Past is 3D. Future is 4D. Or past is 3D, sorry. Now is 4D, future is 5D. But that's only based on my reality, right? Somebody else's reality would be 3D is now, 4D is future, 5D is future for them, right? But the earth is holding all at the exact same time. She's in all three of these dimensional fields at the same time. Here's earth, right? In 3D, here's earth in 4D, here's earth in 5D. Based on your frequency and dimension, you're going to be experiencing that earth field. So if you're in a 5D field, you're going to be experiencing a 5D earth experience. It's all a choice. Most of us are not standing in 5D yet. So the collective is going to start to shift with us as we start opening these fields up. So the reality around us will start to shift. Chaos will start to settle, right? The murder, the rape, the torture, all of these things are going to slowly start to settle as the larger collective starts to shift into higher states of consciousness. Believe it or not, it's already happening. I mean, one small example is just watching how belief systems in the collective change. Just look back at history. Right? It doesn't mean that it's completely cleared out, but it's changing. The way we treat humans is changing. Not completely, okay? There are still many places where there is not equality, right? But it used to be much more intense. Inequality, human inequality was much more intense 70 years ago, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago. That shift happened because the collective shifted in consciousness. So as the collective continues to shift into these higher states of consciousness, our reality around us will shift. It will start to change. But it's very 3D right now for most of the collective. This physical ascension is just now starting. So we've been continuing to hold these higher and higher frequencies until we hit a 50% mark, right? Which was in 1989. And once Earth hit that 50% mark, which means that her form was now holding 50% of her light quotient, off to the races she could go, and the actual physical ascension could begin. And this also meant that she could no longer be pulled back into any lower frequency by any human form or any beings. It's a universal law. So no matter what happens on the earth plane, she is never moving back down into a lower frequency. This was created when she was starting again in 3D. So in 1989, the harmonic convergence, I keep calling it the clarion call, sorry. The harmonic convergence in 1989 was when Earth held 50% of her light quotient, and off to the races she went. She could just start to move forward without the wondering or worrying, not that she worried, but of anything pulling her down. It's also when the human form started to physically begin to ascend. which means that it started to open and anchor into the next highest dimensional field. It was holding enough light within its form to start to anchor into the 4D field and start to tap into 5D consciousness. That is when we started tapping into 5D consciousness, really tapping into it, and 4D. And only a group of us were, right? Most of humanity wasn't. Now there's millions of us talking about this, the ascension. In 1989, nobody talked about the ascension. They didn't even know what it was. They thought you were nuts. Now it's all over the place, right? Why? Because the entire collective consciousness is starting to shift. And we, you, us, are starting to be this more and more and more. Got it? That's what's happening. Earth and humanity cannot be pulled back. It's not happening. It hasn't happened anymore. We're moving forward, and your job as a light worker, starseed, way shower, whatever you want to call you, beautiful human aspect, beautiful being of light, your job is to continue to trust that this is why you're here, and your job is to continue to take one step in front of the other, recognizing that you are going first, you are doing it first, and you are doing it for the rest of humanity. Okay, I love you guys so much. I hope this sparked something in you. And if it didn't, beautiful. If it did, it's a remembrance. It's a deep, deep, guttural, instinctual, cellular, light code DNA remembrance. It's a turning on of who you are and what you're doing here. And that all the details of the 3D everyday nitty-gritty is important, and you can't escape it. But it's also really important to remember the bigger picture. Okay? Thank you for being here. Not only in this community, but also in this now moment in your human form. I love you.